right. And if anyone has any questions along the way, feel free. You can unmute yourself and ask as we go. Just have one more person joining us here, or you can use the chat function, or we can address things at the end, or feel free to contact me afterwards. Whatever you are most comfortable with. Yeah, so we've got Our Lady of Fatima here from Huntington, and St. Peter the Fisherman, and all kinds of people. So thank you everyone for joining us. So the title of this talk, Footprints of Our Journey with Christ, is derived from a quote by Archbishop Pilarczyk of Cincinnati. He died just last year, but he had said that sacramental records are the footprints of our sacramental journey with Christ. They trace the powerful presence of God's grace in our lives as individuals and as communities. These are vitally important records, and we'll talk about why that is. But especially here in West Virginia, where over the decades, we've seen such a flux in population. These records, they illustrate the rich ethnic heritage of our state. Not many people think of West Virginia as this great ethnic state, which we are. But over the years, we've had kind of an exodus. Industries have declined, and there have been a lot of people that can trace their ethnic heritage back here to West Virginia. And for some of those people, these records are the only proof that they existed, where civil records are missing or non-existent. So the existence of these sacramental registers as permanent historical records is of paramount importance. Keep going here. There we go. So this is a big topic. It's more than we can cover in the next 50 minutes or so. Back in, I think it was 2015 or 2016, we had offered a series of half-day workshops, sacramental records workshops around the state, myself and Monsignor Kevin Quirk, and we were able to go more in depth there. And once it's safe for us to meet again, maybe we'll look at taking that show on the road again, if I could pry Monsignor away from his parish, or perhaps next year at Pace, we'll look at doing this again, where hopefully we can meet in person. But to try and cover everything here inside an hour would be impossible. So instead, this is going to serve more as just a broad overview, kind of touching on questions and issues that have come up over the past few years that we've noticed in our parishes. So many of you do contact me, you call me, and some of you call me frequently, and that's fine. That's terrific. I love hearing from you, but I definitely want you, if you aren't sure of anything relating to your sacramental records or record keeping, by all means, please contact me, and we'll make sure we get you set. And I apologize before we go too far into this. My slides here are kind of text heavy, but I wanted to make sure you had, there is a lot of information, and I wanted to make sure I got it to you. If anyone would like a copy of this PowerPoint presentation afterwards, feel free to email me, and I'll make sure you get a copy to reference. So your baptism begins what's a lifelong sacramental journey with Christ. Like I said, these records quite literally chart our footprints on that journey. And everyone in this session today, I see we have some pastors and some clergy here. We have parish staff, and myself included. We all have an obligation to the faithful of our diocese, both living and dead, to carefully and accurately record and maintain their sacraments. We are canonically bound to maintain these sacramental records. There are several canons that relate to this, canon 486, 487, 491, but it's canon 535 that specifically deals with, outlining that each parish is to maintain a baptismal, marriage, and death register, and that each baptismal record is to be notated with information relating to your later sacraments. And that's why baptismal records are so important, because the rest of your sacraments will tie back to it eventually. You will reference that baptism record for the rest of your life. Each parish should have its own seal, and we'll talk about parish seals and certificates later. Each parish should have an archive to store permanent records where closed records or closed registers are to be safeguarded, and we'll go over all of that as well. So Canon 535 also tells us that, specifically we need to keep baptism, marriage, and death, like we talked about, but most of the parishes keep more registers than that. Additional registers can be prescribed according to your conference or by your diocese. So for example, First Communion. Communion is a repetible sacrament. We receive communion every time we go to Mass. But we do keep track of our First Communion, and some parishes will send out notification to the parish of baptism for that to be notated on the baptismal record, and some don't. That's fine. That's not a deal breaker. Confirmation, here we also keep confirmation records. Notification is always sent back, or should always be sent back from the parish where confirmation was conferred back to the parish of baptism, and that should be notated on the baptismal register as well. And I know many of you keep up with that, and I appreciate that. There are also registers for RCIA, and that could be the Book of the Catechumens, Book of the Elect, Reception into Full Communion. Some of you may keep these registers, some of you may not. The Reception into Full Communion register is not a mandatory register, but it is mandatory that any individual received into full communion must also be recorded in the baptismal register of the parish. We want to make sure that that is happening. And we also have sick call registers here as well. So the responsibility for your sacramental registers, it's going to start and end with your pastor or your parish priest. Now he does have the prerogative, if he wants to delegate that responsibility to his parish staff, that's fine. But in the end, it's up to him to ensure that the record is accurate, reliable, and protected. And it would actually behoove him to have two individuals in the parish office who are trained in recording sacraments. Sometimes we do have turnover in our parish staff, or if someone takes, maternity leave or an extended leave, it's going to be helpful to have more than one person who knows how to record this information. To help ensure the accuracy of the information, it's important that these sacraments be recorded in the register as soon as possible after the sacrament is celebrated. So if a wedding is celebrated on a Saturday and a baptism on a Sunday, you'll want to try to record those sacraments the following Monday. Please don't wait until you have 10 or 12 stacked up to do and do those all at once. That's a good way for things to get out of order or to be missed entirely. We have had a few parishes recently where we found some sacraments that hadn't been recorded for several years. And it can take a long time and a lot of work to correct this, and it increases the likelihood that something can be entered incorrectly. So we want to try to avoid that at all costs and make sure that you enter the information as soon as possible following the sacrament. And over the last several years, we've seen more of our parishes cluster, where multiple parishes might share one priest, or they might share one office. We have this here in Wheeling with St. Alphonsus and St. John in Benwood, and St. James in McMecken. Their parish office is at St. Alphonsus, where everything, all of the records and registers and everything are processed there at St. Alphonsus. But as a rule, unique registers are to be kept for each unique parish. So, parish A might be clustered with parish B right now, but 5 years down the road, parish A might end up being clustered with parish C. So, having individual registers helps in situations like that. So if you're responsible for the office of a clustered group of parishes, you should be maintaining multiple sets of registers. If your parish is responsible for a mission or a chapel, you're not necessarily required to keep separate registers for each mission. You can incorporate mission or chapel sacraments within your parish registers, as long as it's clearly noted that the sacrament was celebrated at the mission or at the chapel. But even so, it may be beneficial for you to have separate registers for missions. A mission maybe, or ideally, would be on its way to being elevated to a parish, like we saw, I think it was last year with St. Bernadette in Hedgesville. So, at that point, the mission register could be turned over to the parish. Or, occasionally you'll see a mission transferred to a different parish, which happens, that happened more frequently in the past than it does today. But in situations like St. Bernadette, where it's elevated, it could be helpful to have those records as their own separate registers. But what I would stress here is that however you are presently recording sacraments from a mission or from a chapel, whether they are in your parish register or whether they are in their own register, continue doing that whichever way you are presently doing it. Don't try to change midstream or anything. For sacraments that are celebrated outside the parish or mission, recording that sacrament is based on territory. So you'll see this with some of our campus ministry or prisons or hospital chapels around the state. So for example, any sacrament celebrated at the chapel at Wheeling University would ideally be recorded at St. Michael, in whose territory the campus there sits. The same with like sacraments that are conferred at the Hilltop at West Liberty. Those are recorded at St. John and Wellsburg, where that campus ministry is situated within the parish territory. But finally, for this slide, when one parish merges with another, the sacramental records of the old parish are closed on the date the new parish begins. We've seen this within the past few decades, like in Morgantown and in Fairmont. And when we say a register is closed, that means no more sacraments are being added to the register, only notations to sacraments. There are many, many closed registers here in the diocesan archives that I am still recording notations in on a weekly or monthly basis. But so, when we say closed, that's only no new sacraments being added, just notations. But if a register is open, you are still adding new sacraments. So once a few parishes would merge, you would start a new register, and the only thing you would be adding to the old register are notations. It's a little confusing, but feel free to contact me with any questions there. So, like we've talked about, like we've stressed here, sacramental registers are permanent records. They can never be destroyed, never, never, ever. By their nature, these books are used daily or weekly for many, many years, many, many decades. And because they're permanent, we want them to last. So, when you need to start thinking about ordering a new register, there are some things that you can keep in mind. You want to order a register with acid-free paper. And most registers today, from reputable dealers, most of them would be advertised as being a Permalife or acid-free paper. Occasionally, some companies may still print books in developing countries that don't have as exacting standards for paper permanence. So you definitely want to make sure that it is advertised as acid-free. In terms of a binding, permanent binding is preferable. That's a binding that's both sewn and glued. That gives you a strong hold. The register must contain an index, and whether that's like a pre-printed index, or if there's several pages in the front where you make your own, but you do want an index in the front of the book. And combined registers are definitely okay. These are single registers that contain different sections for each of the sacraments. Many of our parishes have opted to go with combined registers today, instead of keeping 4 or 5 different books. When you're entering information into the register, entries must be legible and neatly printed letters. I am sure that many of you have beautiful cursive writing, but for these registers, we want simple printed letters. And to that end, we only want to use black ink. Absolutely no pencils, which can be erased, no colored ink, no felt-tipped markers, no highlighters. We recommend what's called a Micron Pigma Pen. These are black, acid-free, fade-proof, water-resistant ink. They could be purchased on Amazon or from office supply stores for around $5. And when we did these workshops around the state several years ago, we distributed these pens to the attendees. And I think I ordered more last year after we did this presentation. And so I do still have a few extra here at the office. If anyone needs a pen, a proper pen to record the sacraments, please get in touch with me. I will be more than happy to send you a pen for your parish. And here's an example of the Micron Pigma Pen. So, we'll touch briefly on how to record entries, do late entries and corrections. This is a specific area where we could definitely spend a lot more time. So maybe, we'll look at doing more classes at next year's pace, or like I said, maybe taking the show back on the road at some point to vicariate meetings. But let's start with the index. Like I mentioned, please don't neglect the index in front of the register. The index should go in chronological order and should be recorded as you see here. And that's last name, first name, middle initial, and the corresponding page number and line number. So if you see here, you have John M. Ellis, who would be found on page 20, line 2. The easiest way for a record to become lost in the register is just by failing to use the index. Not everyone recalls their date of baptism, or hopefully everyone knows their date of marriage, but a lot of people don't know their date of baptism, and sometimes it can take a while to find without a good index. So please make sure that we are using the index. So as we mentioned, new entries are to be made in chronological order according to the date of the sacrament. All entries must include the full name of the individual, and that's both last name and first name. You should always try to include the full middle name, but a middle initial is acceptable. We definitely don't want any nicknames or abbreviations or informalities, none of that. But also make sure you spell out the full month. Don't use an abbreviation or a number. So if someone were baptized today, we wouldn't record December 1st, 2021. We would be writing out December 1st, 20. We wouldn't record it as 12/1/21. We would be writing out December 1st, 2021. So if a single line ends up being inadequate, which sometimes happens, you can use another line, or you can use the margin at the top or the bottom of the page, or even the back of the register. Just make sure that if you do run out of space on that line, that wherever you put that additional information, that it's cross-referenced back to the original page and the original line number. So if you end up with it in the back of the book, reference that on that first line, and then reference in the back of the book back to the page and the line number. Occasionally, we do run across situations where sacraments were not recorded. Either the pastor or his delegate forgot to enter them into the register. In this event, we would need to do a late or a delayed entry. You'll want to work with your pastor here to obtain the necessary proof, and that could include copies of the original certificate, or affidavits from 2 witnesses, or from maybe the priest or the deacon who had presided there. You'll want to work with your pastor for all of that. But in that way, you can do a delayed entry. If the individual was baptized as an adult, the oath of the individual or a single witness is sufficient evidence. But the new entry should be entered out of order and indexed. A notation should be made by the person authorizing the new entry, so your pastor or deacon or whomever you have there. The supporting documentation that was produced should be kept on permanent file, and a cross-reference to that file should be placed in the notation of that late entry. Please don't keep this documentation in the book. I've had a lot of registers come into the diocesan archives that have copies of old certificates or notifications or whatever jammed inside the book, and that kind of it'll end up breaking the binding when you get enough of them in there. So you do need to keep the documentation, just please keep it in a separate file. So, while we want to be as careful as possible when recording sacraments, all of the data is considered official and permanent. These records can stand in civil law as valid and authenticating evidence when a civil record is missing or doesn't exist. So, we want to be extremely careful when recording these records, but even so, errors can sometimes happen. And in that case, we can do corrections. So in the case of a simple correction, and this would be something like a misspelling at the time that the record was created, you can draw a single or a double strike through line through the mistake and make the correction immediately above or below or adjacent to. Later corrections should include a notation to be made along with the date and the signature or initials of the person authorizing that change. But changes of a more substantial nature are to be made only with authenticating evidence and should be recorded on an entirely new line. The original or the incorrect record should be noted that no certificates should be drawn from that original record. You should only reference the new record. But regardless, whatever the issue is, whether it's something minor, whether it's a more substantial change, it is never acceptable for a record to be completely destroyed. Please do not try to erase or completely scratch out or white out or obliterate that record in any way. We only ever just use a simple strike through. So as I mentioned, permissible corrections would include name spelling or dates. If someone legally changes their name, that may be changed, as well as the addition of adoptive parents to the record. Non-permissible changes include non-adoptive parents or foster parents, nicknames, and changes to sponsors. Sometimes, we've had people ask to have their children's godparents or their sponsors changed or removed. In that event, you can instruct that the parents may find someone else to fill the role of the godparents, but no change may be made to the original register. Any subsequent certificates, anything issued subsequent to that request should always reflect the original godparents. So, we've mentioned notifications a few times. These are to be issued to the parish of baptism when an individual receives confirmation or marriage or holy orders. And then, if you want First Communion, and that's all to be notated on the baptismal record. Please don't neglect these. Like I mentioned, everything ties back to your baptismal record. So if you were to fail to send out a notification of confirmation or marriage or holy orders, any subsequent certificates issued may end up being incomplete. And then you have to kind of look around and try to figure out where these things happen. People do move, they join different parishes. So you want to make sure that you're keeping up your end of the bargain and sending out those notifications. So when you receive a notification, after you make the notation on the record, you can file that notification or you may destroy it. But please don't keep it in the register. Like I said, so I've seen some registers that are just jammed full of them and it breaks the binding and it can really do a lot of damage. So, sometimes you'll receive a notification that has a little perforated section or a signature line asking you to return it and confirm that the notation has been made. Even if your parish does this and you file those notifications right into the wastebasket when they come in, try to be courteous and return it to that parish if requested. But like I said, once that notification is made, you are free to destroy that notification, or once the notation is made, you are free to destroy that notification or file it whichever you would like. But as long as the notification has been made, you shouldn't, or as long as the notation has been made, you shouldn't have to refer back to that original notification at any time. So when I get them here in the diocesan archives, after I make a notation on a record, I destroy the notification. So, all of you have likely been asked to fill out a certificate. A certificate is the official document which certifies that an individual has received a sacrament. There are blanks available that you can purchase, or some of you may have created templates on your computer. That's what I've done here in the archives. But only the parish or the location that holds the original record may issue a certificate. So like here in the diocesan archives, I have many closed registers from parishes. I create certificates based from those because I'm the custodian of the original record here. When I get a request, I pull out that original record and make the certificate from that. Information is to be duplicated exactly as it appears in the register, unless the information in the register is marked confidential. That could be information relating to an adoption or something like that. But you must include all notations on a new certificate. If there are no notations on the original record, simply put no notation on that line of the certificate, just so that the parish or the individual doesn't think that they were inadvertently left out. You may want to fill out a certificate by hand, but if written out, it must be legible. I know some parishes still do that, and that's fine. Just make sure that it's all legible. Must also include the signature of the pastor or the deacon. That signature must be signed on the form, not stamped, not a digital signature. It must be hand signed. The certificate must also be stamped with a raised parish seal, which everyone here should have. Finally, certificates cannot be issued from a digital source like ParishSoft. You must reference the original register when preparing a certificate, which brings me to my next point. This is where we've had some issues in recent years. You are free to keep digital copies of your sacramental records. This can be for indexing or for ease of access. This could be ParishSoft. This could be an Excel spreadsheet, an Access database, anything like that. But under no circumstance would this digital resource replace the written register. A complete handwritten record must first be created in the register before you enter any of that information into ParishSoft. In terms of sacramental records, ParishSoft is secondary to the physical register. The physical register is considered the only authentic copy of a sacramental record. So like we mentioned in the previous slide, you cannot issue a certificate from the information in ParishSoft. You must consult the original record. And that's because if someone's not keeping up ParishSoft, if you've had several employees who use ParishSoft or a database or an Excel spreadsheet, they may have missed a vital notification that came in for a notation to be made. We always want to make all of those notations and record the sacraments in the register first. That way you have a complete file there. But even here in the diocesan archives, like the microfilm that I have, it's fine for people to do genealogical research. But say, after those records were microfilmed, 15 years ago, the very next day, I might have received a notification to be made in that register, and immediately the microfilm is out of date. It doesn't include that notification that came in after the date of microfilming. So that's why we always go to the original record to issue a certificate. Finally, even if you keep copies of the records on your computer, if you have, a lot of people are working backwards, or parishes that have the time have been working backwards through their sacramental records, entering that information into ParishSoft, and that's fine. But no matter what you've done, and no matter how bad the condition of the original register is, you may never destroy the original record. Briefly, I'd like to go over confidentiality. Sacramental records are considered confidential, even though most sacraments are publicly celebrated. They may contain sensitive information. As such, the physical registers are not to be opened for examination by the general public for any reason whatsoever. So here in the diocesan archives, we set, I think it's 100 years. After 100 years, someone could go in and they can do their genealogical research using our microfilm without any kind of restrictions. But for all the genealogical researchers that come in here, I would never open a physical register to them. They can only use the microfilm. And so I know parishes have been approached by genealogists, and some people can be kind of pushy about it. If that's ever the case, that people are really adamant about seeing an original record, please refer them here to the diocesan archives. I'm happy to talk to them and explain why that will not happen. Registers are to be reviewed annually by the vicar forain or by the bishop or one of his designates. You might notice a little notation on the top or bottom of each page of your register that maybe says something like visum and a date. That's just noting that your vicar or the bishop or someone has reviewed that page for accuracy. Finally, registers may not be removed from the parish, may not be copied, and may not be loaned without the express written approval of the diocese. You might be contacted by a local library or by a company like Ancestry or Find My Past, or someone who offers to scan your registers or maybe even offers to do that work for free. Please do not contract with anyone for any of that type of work without contacting us first. So like we talked about, genealogy ties into confidentiality. Like we said, sacramental registers should never be made available to genealogical researchers. If you would like, you may conduct the research for the individual. I would caution only to do that as your time permits, but never just hand over the original registers to them. Like I said, you could refer them to the diocesan archives. We do have the majority of our sacramental records on microfilm, and then we open them for benchmarks, typically 100 years for baptism and about 50 years for marriage and death records. We'll briefly touch on storing and handling your registers. It's highly recommended that your registers be stored in a fireproof safe or a filing cabinet. If stored in a cabinet, those registers should be stored spine down. I know we tend to want to store books, spine up, where we can write on the spine or put a label or something on the spine. But when we do that, gravity is working against the register. It's wanting to pull the pages down away from the binding. So eventually they'll detach from the register, and that's where we get brittle pages and chipped pages, and you look in the bottom of your file cabinet and it looks like confetti. So we want to make sure that we are storing those spine down. If you're storing books on a shelf inside a cabinet or just open in your parish office, it would be better to store them flat. Please try not to stack registers more than 3 high. Some of our registers, especially some of the older ones, can be quite heavy, and that'll pancake the bottom register and eventually break the binding and do some damage there. Avoid prolonged exposure to sunlight or fluorescent light. That means, if you have them on an open shelf, make sure they're not near a window. If you are working on a register in the office and you leave to go to lunch, make sure that you close the register. Please don't leave it open laying under the lights when not in use. Don't store registers on the floor. You do want some airflow between the floor and the register. Maybe at least 3 inches off the floor would be good. Don't store them near food storage or preparation areas. So some parishes have their office near kitchens or food storage areas, but those areas can breed pests. Don't have a candle lit near your register. Sparks can travel several feet before extinguishing. So, if you keep a candle going in your office, try not to keep that near your register. And also, don't store your registers near any overhead pipes or other sources of water. We have seen some water leaks and water damage in parishes in recent years. But regardless of where you store them, like I said, all of your records should be at least 3 inches off the floor, that allows for airflow and a little space in the event of any type of water event in your office. The ideal environment for registers is about 68 degrees and about 45% RH, relative humidity. We understand most of our parishes aren't able to meet such exacting conditions. So the rule of thumb, what I tell people here is, wherever you are comfortable, your records will be comfortable. That means no registers in the attic, no registers in the basement. Paper is organic. So in places like attics and basements, where we see, we can see wild flight, especially here in West Virginia, we can see wild fluctuations in temperature and humidity. It can be really hot and sticky in the summer. It can be freezing in the winter. So, like the wooden doors in your house, they're wooden doors, they're organic. When it's hot, those doors expand, they get harder to open and close. And then when it's cold, they contract, and you might get more airflow, more gaps between your door and the frame. But paper does the exact same thing. And that constant expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting will eventually break down the fibers in your paper and lead to, embrittlement. You want to make sure that your records are secured when not in use. In any event of loss or theft or destruction of a register, please contact the chancellor and the diocesan archives immediately. In recent years, we have had some registers that were lost to theft, that were lost to flood, and that were lost to fire. So this does happen. Just please make sure that we know about it as soon as possible. It's also important to carefully handle your registers. You should always wash your hands before using them. All of us have oil on our skin. That oil contains acid that will eventually degrade the paper. Especially try not to touch your face or your nose or anything with your hands while you're working with a register. We all have especially a lot of oil on our faces. Avoid the temptation to break the binding. I know how nice it is when your book will lay flat on the desk, but if we break the binding, that's when we start to have detached pages. And finally, try to be careful if you are photocopying pages for any reason. So we don't want to break the binding if we're trying to lay the register flat on a photocopier. I know some parishes have a scanning wand. I would recommend those to any parish. They've come down a lot in price. You can get a wand for like 40 or 50 bucks. And those are a nice option to use with registers instead of trying to move them onto a photocopier or a flatbed scanner. You can use a wand that has a little USB stick in it, and that will capture the image, and then you put the USB into your computer and voila. So repairing your registers, I would ask that you be vigilant on the condition of your registers. You definitely want to watch for signs of embrittlement. If you notice that your pages are starting to chip or crumble, if you see, like we talked about, that confetti in the bottom of your filing cabinet, that's embrittlement. There's no reversing embrittlement. You just have to be extremely careful with that register moving forward. And so often when pages detach, and pages become loose, we lose a lot of important information that way, because on one end, if the book is in front of you and you're looking at it, on the right-hand side are your column for notations with a lot of important information on them. And if you were to turn the page over, on the left side is where you get your names, your last names and stuff. And that's the information that we lose when pages become detached and start chipping and falling apart. You want to watch for broken bindings, which result in loose or detached pages. Broken bindings can be corrected. I do work with a bookbinder in Columbus, Ohio. She used to work out of Parkersburg, but she recently moved to Columbus. And she's done quite a few registers for several of our parishes and for the diocesan archives here. She does really nice work. It's not inexpensive to have a binding corrected or new bindings put on or new boards put on a book. But in the end, it also protects the information that's contained inside the register. So it's a good investment. We just sent off, where we just had returned quite a few registers from St. Alphonsus dating back to the 1850s that were in really bad condition. And they're in really good shape now and should be for a long time moving forward. You want to watch for signs of red rot on your older registers that have leather covers. A lot of our older parishes would often have, big, thick registers that had, attractive leather covers. But if you notice that after you handle some of your older registers that your hands are kind of dirty, that could be red rot. That's the leather breaking down. That can be halted. And I'd advise you, if you are working with older leather-bound registers, try not to, don't hold them to your body or don't touch your clothing after you work with them, because red rot can stain your clothes, that leather breaking down. So make sure you wash your hands after using those and try not to hold them to your body. Also watch for signs of water or moisture damage. That could be, cockled pages, ink that's run, any kind of insect or rodent infestation like silverfish or mice droppings or anything like that. Be vigilant for that, and please let us know if you notice anything. I would ask that you not attempt any repairs on your registers. Please don't use any pressure sensitive tape on the bindings or on the pages. That means no masking tape, no scotch tape, no duct tape. All of that stuff is acidic and will eventually dry and flake off. So try to keep in mind that, first, do no harm. So what may seem like a good idea today might end up being really detrimental down the road. Absolutely never, never, ever laminate the pages, no matter how badly they're falling apart. Lamination is non-reversible. Once something is laminated, it's laminated forever. And laminated pages have a tendency to off-gas eventually and could damage, it'll damage the other books or pages stored around them. But also one reason we don't want to do that is when you laminate something, you are introducing high heat to the paper to make those laminating pages stick together. And we never want to introduce heat to our paper or our registers that, we think we're preserving something by laminating it, but we could really be speeding up the process of deterioration. Please don't use any staples, any glue, no rubber bands, no paper clips on your registers. All of these will eventually dry out or will tear the pages of the register. Like we've mentioned a few times, please don't store notifications or other papers inside your registers. These will break your bindings. Once you record a notation, like we said, you can either file it or you can destroy the notification. And finally, please don't outsource any repairs or rebinding without contacting the archives first. Like I said, we do work with a lady in Columbus, Ohio, and because we've sent her a lot of work, we're able to negotiate better rates than you could get from a lot of other places. So if you think that you have any registers that may need some help, please don't hesitate to let me know. We've done this with several parishes, and it's worked out really well. And most recently with St. Francis in Moundsville, just last year or the year before. So back in 2013, we sent each parish a Sacramental records inventory that was to be returned here to the diocesan archives. It's crazy, it's been almost 10 years, but maybe only a third of our parishes actually returned this inventory. It's really critical that we know how many registers are in each parish. So if you'll recall, several years ago, St. John Parish in Benwood caught on fire. And a few days later, we had to go into the church to try to recover the records. The parish office was in the basement. And while the basement didn't burn, it did fill up with several feet of water. So, when we went in there to try to recover these registers, we did not have an inventory to work from to make sure that we had everything. And working in there with coal miner lamps on our heads, in the dark and the wet and the soot, we did end up missing a few registers, a First Communion and a confirmation register. But thankfully, like we discussed, First Communion is not necessarily a critical register. And for confirmations, those should have been notated on the baptismal record. So, we still have that information somewhere in a baptismal register. So, we could live without those two registers more than we could, a baptism or a marriage record. But we've also reached about 15 years since our last round of Sacramental records microfilming. Microfilm serves as a backup for us in the event that an original register is lost or destroyed. And like we talked about, it's used for general reference by genealogists. So as we begin to think about our next round of microfilming in the next year or so, we have been auditing those parishes that did not return an inventory. So some of you may have heard from Dee Dean, who works with me here in the archives. You wave to everyone, Dee. There she is. But you might have heard from Dee over the past year or so as we ask you to inventory your records. We're also looking at how many pages you filled since the last time your records were filmed. Not every parish sent their records for microfilming back in 2005 or 2006. Some parishes actually haven't had their records filmed since the 1980s. So as we go through and we ask you for what registers you have and how many pages you filled, this is information that's helpful to us in budgeting for this next round of microfilming. So we just ask for your help and your consideration as we try to move this project forward, because after about 8 years of asking, we do still have a handful of parishes who have yet to return an inventory. And I don't know if anyone's on here, but I'm talking to you: Camden, Franklin, Glenville, Logan, Marlinton, Moorfield, Petersburg, Philippi, Raynell, Somersville, and Vienna. Let's get those inventories sent in. It is vitally important. Finally, as we kind of wrap this up here, we've had a lot of parishes take advantage of sending their closed registers into the diocesan archives. In the archives here, we do have dedicated storage vault space with a few hundred registers stored here, both from closed parishes and active parishes who sent their closed registers here. When we get them, each register is cleaned when it arrives. I can do some minor repairs here in the office. We've also started to scan some of our registers. I think I saw Mary Catherine is here. She's on from Martinsburg. Martinsburg has been a great example. They transferred some of their oldest registers dating back to the 1920s, or to the 1820s, I'm sorry, here to the diocesan archives. And in return, we provided Martinsburg with scanned copies of every record. So we have the originals here where I can access them, but I think Mary Catherine she can access any of those records from her desktop there in Martinsburg as well. So we try not to leave you completely hanging. We do scan several records a year, but in the interim, until we would get all of the records scanned and returned to the parishes, you're more than welcome to contact me to research any of the records, like from the various Clarksburg parishes that have closed, or Fairmont. Several parishes have taken advantage of this. I work with all of you frequently in getting records from these closed parishes that are held here in our vault. So So, we'd ask parishes to consider transferring any registers that are still outstanding from closed parishes, particularly those that are rarely accessed or those that are especially brittle. Sometimes, we've had some parishes close, 40 or 50 years ago, and those records were transferred to another parish who closed maybe 20 years ago, and then transferred to another parish that's become a mission. So, we have had some registers that have ended up 2 or 3 times removed from their place of creation. And after, X many years or decades, people might not understand or realize what they have there. So especially those are the kinds of registers that we would like to call in to the diocesan archives. It takes the onus off of the parish to maintain those records, and to do the notifications and the certificates when those are asked for. So that's kind of what we're looking for. Like I said, you do still have access to any of these registers once they're transferred. I do a lot of certificates here for parishes who have their registers stored here. Anyone who would be interested in transferring any older registers to the diocesan archives, please contact us. And also, we do not mail or we don't ship any kind of registers. We will make arrangements to pick them up. These books are unique, they're one of a kind, and they are vitally important. And I would not want them sitting on a UPS or a USPS loading dock over a weekend to be lost or destroyed, when I could just come pick them up from you and have a chance to visit all of your beautiful parishes. So, that's what I have for now. Like I said, if you have any questions, we can go over them here at the end, or you are all more than welcome to contact me by phone or by email. I do hear from some of you frequently with all kinds of questions, and honestly, I don't always have the right answer, or I don't immediately have the right answer for everyone. I oftentimes will go and do the research myself to make sure that I'm getting you all of the right information that you need to record all of these sacraments accurately and timely. So, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have here, or by all means, contact me at any time.
I have a question.
Yes.
Recently, we had a lady from St. Anthony died. Her family decided that they wanted the funeral at Immaculate Conception. The priest at Immaculate Conception performed the funeral mass at Immaculate Conception. Okay.
Okay.
Where would her death be recorded? At Immaculate Conception or St. Anthony?
It would be recorded in the parish where the person was buried from. So even if she was a member of your parish but was buried from St. Anthony or another parish, it would be the parish where she was buried from.
So the funeral mass was at Immaculate Conception.
Okay, then Immaculate Conception is where,
even though she was a member of St. Anthony.
Correct.
Okay. We also had a member of St. Anthony die, but they were buried. The funeral arrangement had nothing to do with St. Anthony. They were buried by a Protestant church. So do we even put them in the death register?
I would say no. Occasionally, even if the burial is celebrated outside of the church building, if it was a Catholic funeral liturgy, like say that was supplied at the funeral home, then that would still be recorded. But if it was a Protestant funeral, it would not be recorded, even though the person might have been a member at one time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If anyone else has any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself. And we have worked with some parishes in the past. Occasionally, we have had some fireproof safes or filing cabinets that have come available over the years when You know, we've had some schools close or parishes merge. We have had some come available, and we keep those here in our diocesan storage building. I do not have any available right now, but if anyone does not have a fireproof safe or filing cabinet and would like to be placed on a list, I do keep a waiting list as they become available. We would like to have all of our parishes have them, and I know not everyone does. So if you don't, I'm happy to put you on a list, and as they become available, we can contact you and get those out to you. All right, well, if we don't have any other questions here, we can wrap this up. Thank you for joining me. I know this was supposed to be a few weeks ago. I'm sorry we missed that date. I was feeling a little under the weather. I didn't think I'd be able to talk for about an hour that day. So thanks for hanging with me and tuning in here a couple weeks late. But thanks for joining, everyone. Feel free to contact me with any questions. So there I am. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good Advent, and I hope to hear from everyone soon.